Hey, welcome to the first video of the series on relational database design. In this video, I will introduce you to some of the basic concepts that are associated with relational databases. After that, we'll have a look at an overview of the steps involved in designing and implementing a relational database. To make things as brief as possible, I'm going to assume that you're already familiar with terms like data, database, and DBMS. If you're not familiar with these terms yet, it shouldn't matter too much, but I do recommend going back to your notes or looking them up online. Without further ado, let's start off with this question. What's a relational database? A relational database is a type of a database that organizes its data into tables, and those tables can somehow be connected to each other. You probably get what I mean by organizing data into tables, but what do I actually mean by tables being connected to each other? Take this for an example. Suppose you started a computer store and you decided to keep track of your products, customers, and the sales you make using a relational database. Then here's what it might look like. Notice how we have three separate tables: the product table, the customer table, and the sale table, one for each category of things that we want to store information about. Let's take a look at each one of them. The product table contains the data about the products that are sold at your store. Each product has their product ID, their name, their quantity in stock, and their price. Likewise, the customer table lists out all of the customers and their relevant information registered on your system. Now pay close attention to the last table we got, the sales table. Each row in this table represents a single instance of sale made by your store. Have a look at the first entry in the table. This sale is assigned a sale ID of 2000, which is like a unique name that we give to this sale, so that when someone asks about a sale with ID 2000, we know exactly which sale he's talking about. Next up is the product ID of the product that's associated with this particular sale. If you trace back to the product table and search for the product with 100 as the ID, you see that it's a keyboard that's been purchased in the sale. In fact, if you check out the quantity field of the sale, it's 3 keyboards that's been bought together in one go. In the same manner, the customer ID field of the sale tells us exactly which customer has purchased the keyboards. Just trace back to the customer table with ID 3 and you see that it was Rudra. So essentially what we have over here is the product ID column of the sales table containing references to the actual products in the product table. Likewise, the customer ID column refers to the customers that are recorded in the customer table. This is how the connections between tables are created or established in relational databases. By having tables referencing other tables, what we get is a network of interrelated tables, and that's basically the gist of what a relational database is. Okay, now that we know what they are, let's have a look at how to design one ourselves. We're going to try something fun and unusual. What we're going to do is backward engineer this existing database and come up with some design artifacts that might have been produced in the process of constructing this database. So usually we go from design to its implementation, but for now we're going in the reverse direction. The first thing we're going to do is simply erase all of these records that were just made for example purposes. That basically leaves us with only the key structures of the database, the table names, the column headers, and the lines showing the relationships between the tables. Another important feature to highlight are the ID columns, which play a key role in connecting the tables together. So let's underline their names to indicate their significance to our design. And that's it. This is what we call a relational database schema. It's one of the design artifacts that you'd produce when you're building a relational database. As you can see, it defines how the data should be organized into tables. It tells us what tables we need, what kinds of data we need to store in each table, and what connections are there among the tables. Now, if you take the focus away from the tables and to something more conceptual, like what kind of things are we interested in and how are those things related to each other, then what you get is something that looks like this. This is another type of a design artifact known as an Entity Relationship Diagram, or ERD. Notice how in this ERD, the sales are no longer considered as separate objects. They're rather considered as a form of a relationship between customer and products. And that just illustrates the two different stages of designing a relational database. But of course, when you're building a new database from scratch, you'd go through these steps in the other direction. So let's walk through the steps again, but this time from the very beginning to the end. The first step is requirements analysis. This is where you try to understand and document your problem. So you'll be answering questions like what kinds of information do I want to store in my database, and what kinds of operations do I plan to perform with those data. At the end of this step, you'd have your data requirements documented and ready for the next step in line, which is ER modeling. In ER modeling, you take those requirements and come up with a graphical representation of your database design as an entity relationship diagram. The ERD will illustrate what kinds of entities are involved in the system, what characteristics or properties those entities have, and how those entities are related to each other. Next up is ER to relational mapping. In this step, we are going to translate our ERD into relational database schema, which is much closer to the look and feel of your relational database. So once you've created your relational schema, you can go straight into implementing it in SQL, which is a coding language that's used for defining and interacting with relational databases. After you're done with your implementation, lo and behold, you have your SQL schema, which you can think of as the skeleton defining the structure and behavior of your database. So now you can start adding on the flesh or start entering some data, and that's your relational database. On a side note, often you'll have some data requirements that are just too complicated to be represented in your design artifacts. In that case, you just have to go back to those extra requirements and apply them on top of your basic implementation. And that basically outlines all the planning, designing, and implementation that's involved in making a simple relational database. For this series of videos, we'll primarily focus on these two design steps, ER modeling in the first half of the series, and ER to relational mapping in the second half. So hopefully by now you understand the background or the context in which we apply these design techniques. That's it for today. I'll see you in the next video.